Setting: a technologically advanced alien empire on the brink of war with humanity. The scene begins on the grand capital planet of the Zorvian Empire, a world of towering spires and advanced military technology. Princess Aelana stood at the grand balcony of her father's palace, overlooking the vast capital of Zorvia. The spires of the city gleamed like silver under the twin suns, and the bustling streets were filled with people from across the empire. The sky above was a soft golden hue, but to the princess everything felt distant and cold. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the impending war. Her father, King Vorthak, sat at the head of the empire's war council in the chamber below. He was a man of immense power, a ruler who commanded respect, but also a father who loved his only daughter. He had ruled for decades, shaping the empire into one of the most powerful in the galaxy. Yet now, with enemies closing in, his mind was occupied with something far more dangerous. The humans. Father, Aelana muttered to herself. Why must we rely on them? She was not new to the concept of war. The Zorvian Empire had fought many battles in its long history, but none had shaken her like this one. The enemy this time wasn't just another alien race vying for power. It was humanity, a species that had become known for their unpredictability and their fighters' unmatched skill in battle. Her father's voice echoed through the walls of the palace as he spoke to his council. We must send for him. He is the only one who can save us now. The him her father referred to was Commander Lucius, a human warrior known across the galaxy for his brutal strength and cunning strategies. The stories of his battles had spread far and wide, making him both a hero to his people and a terror to their enemies. But to Princess Aelana, Lucius represented something far more terrifying. She had heard the tales of the human warriors, fearsome battles, of entire fleets of alien ships falling before his might. She had heard how he fought with a cold, calculating precision, showing no mercy to those who stood in his way. To Aelana, the thought of facing such a person was unbearable. Father, please, Aelana had said earlier that day, her voice trembling. There must be another way. I've heard the stories. These humans, they are not like us. I fear what they could do. But King Vorthak had been resolute. We need him, Aelana. He's the only one who can turn the tide of this war. You must trust me. Now, as she stood on the balcony looking out over the city, she could only feel the weight of that decision. The fear that had been growing inside her since she'd first heard of Lucius had only intensified with each passing day. The man was said to be more than just a warrior. He was a living legend, and that alone frightened her. I don't know if I can do this, Aelana whispered to herself. I don't know if I can stand before him. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see her father walking toward her, his regal robes flowing behind him. His face was stern, but there was a softness in his eyes as he looked at his daughter. Aelana, he began, his deep voice carrying a sense of finality. It is time. The human warrior will arrive tomorrow. The princess nodded silently, unable to speak her true feelings. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a comforting squeeze. You must be strong. We need to show him our trust, just as he will show us his. This alliance is crucial for the survival of our people. Aelana forced a smile, trying to mask the fear in her heart. I understand, Father. Setting: a war-torn battlefield at the edge of the galaxy. The skies are filled with explosions as the Zorvian forces prepare to engage the Krazon. The sun set on the battlefield, casting long shadows over the land as the Zorvian forces rallied for the coming storm. Princess Aelana stood beside her father, gazing at the horizon, where the first signs of the Krazon fleet began to appear. The vast armada was approaching with terrifying speed, and she knew the battle would soon begin. Her heart raced. She had always been sheltered in the palace, kept away from the horrors of war. Yet today, she could not escape its grip. The air around her felt heavy, thick with tension. It wasn't just the impending invasion that weighed on her, it was the arrival of Lucius, the human warrior who had been promised as their ally. The Zorvian Empire had been in a tense peace with humanity for years, but now the time for diplomacy had passed. A battle for survival had begun, and the humans were their only hope. The human warriors, led by Commander Lucius, had been called upon to turn the tide in favor of the Zorvians. Aelana didn't know what to expect from this human. The stories she had heard made him sound more like a myth than a man. Cold, emotionless, and ruthless. But nothing had prepared her for the man who stood before her now. Introduction of Lucius. The sound of heavy footsteps approached, and Aelana turned to see him, Lucius, the human warrior. His tall figure stood in stark contrast to the shorter, more slender Zorvian soldiers. He wore a simple uniform, dark and unadorned, but his presence commanded attention. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the gathering of Zorvian officers, assessing them with the sharpness of a predator. Aelana felt a chill run down her spine. He wasn't what she expected at all. The human warrior had the look of a soldier hardened by countless battles. His face, though young, bore the weight of many years of combat. There was something about him that unsettled her, something in the way he held himself, both confident and detached, as if he had seen too much to be moved by anything now. Lucius locked eyes with Aelana for a brief moment. There was no warmth in his gaze, but there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. For a moment, she felt exposed, as if he could see straight through her. Her fear of him deepened in that instant. He wasn't just a warrior. He was something else entirely, a weapon forged by the harsh realities of war. Princess Aelana, Lucius spoke, his voice low and steady. I am Lucius, commander of the human forces. It's an honor to meet you. His tone was respectful, but distant. Aelana could see that he was the kind of man who spoke only when necessary, and even then, it was with cold precision. She forced herself to meet his gaze, trying to mask the unease swirling in her chest. The honor is mine, Commander Lucius, she replied, though her voice quivered slightly. I trust you will lead us to victory. Lucius gave a small nod, his expression unchanged. We will fight and win, Princess. This I promise you. The first battle. The battle began at dawn, with the deafening roar of warships filling the pole air. Aelana stood beside her father, watching as the Zorvian forces engaged the Krazan fleet in space. She had seen war before, but nothing like this. The Krazan ships, massive and terrifying, unleashed a barrage of weaponry that shook the ground beneath her feet. The sky was ablaze with fire as the Zorvian forces retaliated. But it wasn't the ships that caught Aelana's attention. It was Lucius. She watched as the human warrior led his troops with relentless determination. His soldiers, though few in number compared to the Zorvians and Krazans, fought with an intensity that was unmatched. Lucius moved like a shadow, his actions precise and calculated. Each strike he made was deadly, efficient, and without mercy. Aelana had never seen anything like it. The humans were different. They fought with a kind of single-mindedness that the Zorvians lacked. They weren't just soldiers, they were warriors in every sense of the word. Despite her fear, Aelana couldn't help but be drawn to the human warrior's skill. He was like a force of nature, carving a path through the chaos. He moved with purpose, never pausing, never hesitating. He was exactly what her father had promised, a weapon of incredible power. But even as she admired his strength, she felt a growing unease. The humans were too efficient, too ruthless. The thought that this warrior might have been molded for battle, trained to fight without emotion or remorse, unsettled her. Could someone like Lucius ever understand the true cost of war? The growing bond. Over the course of the battle, Aelana found herself in more frequent contact with Lucius. Her initial fear of him slowly began to shift, though she still couldn't shake the sense that he was more machine than man. They spoke on occasion, brief, sharp exchanges about battle tactics and the progress of the fight. But each conversation left Aelana with more questions than answers. One evening, as they prepared for the next wave of Krazan forces, Aelana found herself walking alongside Lucius. She had seen him standing apart from the rest of the commanders, his focus entirely on the war ahead. There was no celebration, no relaxation after their victories. Just the constant drive to press forward. "Commander Lucius," she began, her voice hesitant. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Princess Aelana," he replied, his tone neutral. Aelana hesitated. "Do you ever—" She stopped herself, unsure how to phrase her question. "Do you ever think about what we're fighting for? I mean, beyond the battle itself?" Lucius seemed to pause, considering her question. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from him, and Aelana couldn't help but feel a strange connection in that instant. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a person who might, just maybe, understand her fears. "There's always something," Lucius said finally, his voice softer than usual. "But when you're in battle, you focus on the present. The war is everything until it's done. There's no time to think about the past or the future." Aelana frowned. "But what about the people? What about the lives we're losing? Doesn't that matter?" Lucius's gaze softened slightly. "It matters," he said quietly. "But sometimes survival is the only thing that matters. You'll understand when you've seen enough." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Aelana didn't respond right away. She didn't know if she would ever understand. She wasn't sure she wanted to. But as the days passed, Aelana began to see the world through Lucius's eyes, if only for a moment. She saw the war not just as a battle for victory, but as a struggle for survival. The stakes were high, and every decision mattered. She began to understand that the choices Lucius made were not about cruelty, they were about necessity. The war was nearing its peak, and Princess Aelana felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her chest. She stood in the war room alongside her father, King Vorthok, and the other military leaders. The map projected in front of them was a complex web of lines and flashing lights, each symbol representing a battle, a victory, or a loss. The Krazan forces were closing in, their ships advancing toward the heart of Zorvian space. Aelana's mind raced as she surveyed the Yaoi map. The Krazan were relentless, pushing forward with every bit of strength they had. But the Zorvian forces were holding their ground, thanks to the unexpected arrival of Commander Lucius and his human warriors. She had to admit it. Lucius was everything her father had promised. His strategy had turned the tide of the war in their favor. But now, the final battle was approaching. And with it, the real test of their alliance. Her father, King Vorthok, stood at the head of the room, giving orders with his usual calm authority. Despite the chaos around them, he remained focused, his mind always several steps ahead. Aelana could see the toll the war had taken on him. His once proud shoulders now seemed hunched, and the lines on his face were deeper than ever. But there was no time for rest. The Krazan had to be defeated. "Princess Aelana," the voice of Lucius broke her out of her thoughts. She turned to face him, her breath catching in her throat. Lucius stood at the door, his gaze intense as always. His uniform was torn and worn from countless battles, but his presence was as commanding as ever. The warrior had become a legend in her eyes, cold, unflinching, and unstoppable. He had led the charge in countless battles, and now it seemed he would lead them to the final one. The rescue. "Princess," Lucius said, stepping closer to her, "we have received intelligence that the Krazon are preparing to strike at the heart of our defenses. The final assault will begin within the next few hours. You must be ready." Alanna nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had never been this close to the edge of war before. She had always lived a life of comfort, hidden away in the palace, sheltered from the reality of battle. But now, the reality was inescapable. The war had come to her doorstep, and she had to face it, no longer just as a princess, but as a leader. Lucius continued, his voice steady and calm. "I will lead our forces to the front lines. We have the strength to hold our position, but it will require everything we have." Alanna could see the fire in his eyes, the same fire she had seen in every soldier under his command. It was a fire born of purpose, of duty, and of sacrifice. It was a fire that burned brightly even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Please." "Lucius," Alanna said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Lucius's gaze softened ever so slightly. "You are stronger than you think, Princess. Strength doesn't always come from power or skill. Sometimes it comes from the will to stand and face what's coming, no matter how uncertain the future may be." The turning point. The hours before the battle passed in a blur. Alanna spent the time preparing for the worst, going over the strategies and making the final decisions that would determine the fate of her people. She couldn't afford to make mistakes, but the pressure was unbearable. Every decision she made weighed heavily on her, knowing that one wrong move could spell disaster for the Zorvian Empire. When the time came, she stood at the command center, her heart pounding in her chest. The war room was filled with officers and strategists, all focused on their stations, their eyes glued to the holographic map of the battlefield. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the walls, proof that the battle had already begun. Lucius stood by her side, his usual stoic expression unchanging. His presence was a comfort, but also a reminder of the task ahead. He was the warrior, the one who had led them to this point. But now, it was time for Alanna to lead as well. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Begin the final assault," she commanded, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. As the words left her mouth, the room came alive with activity. Officers barked orders, sending messages to their forces in the field. The warships above began to mobilize, preparing to engage the Krazon fleet in the final battle for the future of the Zorvian Empire. The battle. The battle was fierce, more intense than anything Alanna had ever imagined. The Krazon forces attacked with all their might, their ships unleashing devastating blasts of energy that shook the entire battlefield. The skies above the Zorvian capital were filled with fire as the two forces collided. Alanna's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold. The Zorvian fleet fought valiantly, but the Krazon were relentless. For every Krazon ship that fell, two more seemed to take its place. The odds were against them, but in the midst of the chaos, there was Lucius, leading. His human warriors with unmatched skill. His ship cut through the Krazon forces like a blade through steel, his soldiers following his every command with precision. The human warriors moved like a well-oiled machine, their actions coordinated and deadly. Alanna could feel the heat of the battle even from the safety of the command room. And then, the Krazon launched their final assault, a devastating barrage aimed directly at the Zorvian capital. Alanna watched in horror as the first wave of missiles streaked toward the heart of their defenses. "No!" she cried, her heart in her throat. "They're targeting the palace!" The final stand. Lucius's voice came through the comms, steady and calm. Princess, stay inside the palace. We'll hold them off. Ilana's hand clenched into a fist as she watched the missiles draw closer. There was no time to waste. No, Lucius. I'm not staying behind. I will fight alongside you. She could hear the hesitation in his voice. Princess, this is not your place. You have a duty to your people. Stay where it's safe. But Ilana knew that safety was an illusion. This was her empire, her people, and she couldn't simply hide behind the walls of the palace while others fought and died. With determination in her eyes, Elena turned to the officers in the war room. Prepare the defenses. We are not surrendering. We will fight until the end. The final moments. The battle raged on, the fate of the Zorvian Empire hanging in the balance. But as the Krasan forces pressed forward, Ilana felt a shift in the tide. The Zorvian and human forces, united in purpose, began to push back against the Krasan. Lucius and his warriors had proven themselves time and time again, and now it was Ilana's turn to show her people that she was worthy of leading them. With each passing minute, the Zorvian forces held their ground, and the Krasan forces began to falter. It was a long, hard-fought battle, but in the end, the Zorvians and their human allies emerged victorious.